Good night, dear friends. Today is a really special day for us. Our Congress in Cartagena, it's approaching, and as part of our previous conferences about numismatics, we have today a Mr. Marc Bink. He is the president of the Edmond Numismatic Society, a collector in numismatics. Thank you so much for being here, Marc. And it's an honor for our Congress to have you here. Thank you for all your support. All of this presentation has been held with the help of Mr. Álvaro Rodríguez. Álvaro is the Vice President for Canada. Álvaro, thank you so much for everything. We're so happy for the event that's going to happen today. And I'll give you the microphone so you can say hi to the group. Thank you so much, Álvaro, once again.
Hey, welcome everybody. For me, it's a very pleasure. I'm part of the Edmonton Numismatic Society. It's a very honor to host in this opportunity the preliminary presentation to Cartagena 2021. And this opportunity, the subject that we have presented is the Sherrit mean. Such is very, very interesting in numismatic because so many Latin American countries was relationate with Sherrit mean.
Thank you so much, Álvaro. So before we start, I'm going to pass the official video of Cartagena 2021. Okay, Álvaro, so I will ask you to please introduce us, Mr. Marc Bink, and then we can start the presentation. Marc, I'm gonna put you as a host so you can show your presentation, okay?
Okay, now we want to talk about the Marc Bink. We want to do a little introduce. He is the president of the Edmonton Numismatic Society since 2017. Marc started collecting coins at the young age of 12. He started collecting the Canadian decimal coinage. And currently, his specialty is a continental European, late medieval, and English hammered coinage. He also collects war coins and bank notes, and he have a very extensive modern and German collection. The other things he collects is history books, usually to support his numismatic interests. He is a regular columnist of the Edmonton Numismatic Society magazine, the Planchet, and also he have contributed with articles to the Royal Canadian Numismatic Association magazine, the CNN Journal. He also has presented in a number of numismatic related topics and Edmonton Numismatic Society, like meetings and seminars and shows, and also in the Royal Canadian Numismatic Association in the convention. His work experience, he has been working in the Sherrit site since 1982, and he has numerous jobs within the refinery, including short term in the coinage plant. He currently employed as a department manager at the Sherrit International Refinery in Fort Saskatchewan, Alberta, Canada. Well, with this little introduction, you are sure are in the expert and good hands to present this topic, the share with me.
Thank you, Álvaro, and thank you all for the wonderful introduction. As Álvaro said, my name is Marc Bink, and I'm currently a Sherrit employee, so I will be discussing the Sherrit Mint. And if you'll allow me, I will share my screen and begin the presentation.
Please do. Thank you so much.
So this presentation is about the Sherrit Gordon Mint, which ran from 1961 to 1993. And because I am still currently a Sherrit employee, I have to also tell or say that the views of this presentation in no way reflect the current views of Sherrit International. And this presentation contains historical information about the Sherrit Gordon rolling mill that existed prior to 1993. So a little bit about Sherrit itself. Sherrit was formed in 1927 in Manitoba by a gentleman named Carleton Sherrit, who was a prospector. And that's a photograph of him over there on the right. And so he started the company with a financier out of the Ottawa area called J.P. Gordon, and then promptly sold his stake in the company and decided to take up flying, which unfortunately didn't end well for him. He forgot to put his seatbelt on, and he fell out of out of a perfectly good working airplane. So his involvement with Sherrit Gordon was very, very brief. The real Mr. Sherrit was a gentleman by the name of Eldon Brown, who is pictured there on the right. And he is largely responsible for what the company eventually became. It was his vision and his drive that created a company literally out of nothing. Originally hired by a consortium out of Victoria to speculate the Sherrit strike in the middle of Manitoba, or actually about 200 miles north of a place called Le Pas in Manitoba. He decided he liked the site so much he went to work for it. And he was the prime mover in getting the company moving and building a refinery in that area in 1930. He became the chief operating officer of Sherrit Gordon by 1945. And after the major changes in the company during the post-war period, he came to Fort Saskatchewan and got the site up and running. Here again, pretty much from scratch, and retired eventually from Sherrit Gordon in 1968. So this is just a quick timeline of how the company basically progressed in the beginning. In 1930, they set up a plant. By 1932, it went broke, right in the middle of the Depression. The one thing about Sherrit history is you're going to find that they were always $1 short and a day late. They started the company back up again in 1937, and then soon discovered that the copper strike that they thought was so good actually wasn't, and that would play out by 1948. So then they moved into nickel, and that was discovered in 1941. And at that time, it was the largest field recorded in history at that point in time. But because of the war and the fact that if they would have publicized it in 1941, it would have become a national security issue, they held on to the secret until 1946 and then released it to the world. After they released that, they built a concentrator in Lynn Lake, which is where the new site was located, and started mining nickel and making it into a concentrate for conversion into nickel powder. The problem with it is they needed a decent process. And at that time, there didn't exist one. The only process to produce nickel was to either use a smelter or to go with a procedure that was used in Cuba called the Caron process, whereby you use ammonium carbonate to leach nickel out of raw ore. Sherrit decided to work on a process using ammonium sulfate, which was a little cleaner and a little easier to use, but required a huge amount of natural gas. So that's one of the reasons they came to the Edmonton area. Edmonton is a city located in northern Alberta in Canada. And they had just discovered a huge reserve of natural gas a few years earlier. So the Edmonton area became a perfect site for it. The photograph here shows a town called Fort Saskatchewan, which is about 25 kilometers away from Edmonton to the northeast, and it is along the North Saskatchewan River. This town had the advantage of having a paved highway going to it, and the Canadian National Railway's main line from east to west ran through the town. So that's why it became a plant. So the company bought some property just outside of town, started draining it in the 50s, and then started building on it. Now, why is our nickel important? Because the thing is, our nickel was unique in the way it is made. An old problem had occurred during the Second World War. Nickel, of course, is a strategic metal. And the Germans had figured out by 1942 how to use it in a jet engine. The problem with it is that when you advance power in a jet engine, the amount of heat that is created causes the nickel to expand. And when you're using nickel that is not 100% pure, the turbine blades can expand at different rates of expansion and then clash. So the Germans ended up getting around 3 hours out of their engines before they burned up or blew up. Now, after the war, the Americans had the same problem. they couldn't build a half decent jet engine. Nickel was very, very expensive to refine to get it to that purity required to make a half decent jet engine. So the thing is, when the Sherrit process came up in the mid-50s, and Mr. Brown, who I discussed earlier, went to New York and claiming he was broke, the company needed some money. The banks in the United States, there was actually a gifted gentleman who realized that turbine technology could definitely benefit from this. So they came up with the required amount of money and financed the continuation of the building of the refinery. So they started making nickel in around 1954. And then, of course, to diversify the product, they were looking at building a cold mill, a cold rolling mill. At first, they thought about building vacuum tubes. However, as we all know, that by the mid-50s, electronics had taken a bit of a turn and vacuum tubes were going the way of the dodo bird. It was all about transistors. So they approved the mill, but then somebody decided that, hey, you know, there could be other uses for a rolling mill. And one of these was a gentleman by the name of Rex Pierce, who's depicted at the far left on the photograph, who was a coin collector. And he figured out that the Royal Canadian Mint was having trouble making 5-cent nickels, like 5-cent pieces. The problem is that the ore was mined in Sudbury in Ontario and then shipped to England to be cold rolled and then shipped back to Canada to be stamped. And the Teamsters went on strike, so there was a shortage of nickels. So Mr. Pierce, who had for some reason or other been exiled from the Fort Saskatchewan site, he actually was doing the same job I'm doing now. And he was running the marketing department by this point in time, took up some samples, got himself an appointment with the mint master at the Royal Canadian Mint, and then tried to sell him nickel, pure nickel strip and pure nickel blanks. The mint master, of course, at first figured, yeah, this is just another private company trying to sell us stuff. We really are not interested. However, he did concede to take a few samples from Mr. Pierce and had them struck up. And the end result was the coins came out, the 5-cent piece depicted there, dated 1962. The coins came out with such perfection that the beaver, the animal depicted there, got its whiskers back, which hadn't happened for the entire run of that coinage from 1937 till that point. The biggest reason was because the nickel that Inco was using was around 98–99% pure. And these impurities, once in the strip, would tend to have it strike in different ways. Like there were no two lots that were the same. So collecting Canadian 5-cent pieces is actually quite interesting, and you see quite a lot of varieties with on the monarch side with the king previous to the queen missing an eye or missing an ear, and they're in mint state. Using 100% or what we call 999 nickel, which is 99.999999% pure, alleviated this problem. So the problem that they had at that point in time was they had this vacuum tube plant and they needed to retool it. Mr. Brown, who is depicted in the right-hand side of the photograph in a typical stance, decided to call his friends, the bankers from New York and from Toronto, and took them on a tour of the site and sold them on the idea of making a coinage plant. The Royal Canadian Mint, in the meantime, decided, okay, you guys, we figure you're going to make some coins for us. They ordered something like about 2 billion pieces, and they wanted the first shipment by December 31st in 1961. And believe it or not, the company managed to retool an entire plant and actually get the first shipment out on time to the Royal Canadian Mint. And from that point forward, was involved in making the nickel coinage for Canada from, let's say, about 1961 through to about 1993. So, as I said, the Sherrit rolling mill started in 1961, first making nickel-sized blanks. Then they started getting some high-speed coinage presses about 1966 or thereabouts, and started actually making coins. The coin on the right here is actually a test pattern, and there are numerous examples of that are for sale on the open market. The obverse side is with Henry Kelsey, and the reverse side just says Sherrit nickel on the other. It's the Sherrit company logo. So this is why I didn't depict it. This is one of a series. The coin was actually designed by Rex Pierce himself. You'll also notice on any Sherrit coin, there is a symbol, and this is actually the Sherrit corporate logo. Any coin that is minted by Sherrit will have that logo on it. Now, the coins that Sherrit made for foreign governments do not have that logo on them. That was, of course, by the host country's discretion. So one of the other things that we did in 1968, the Sherrit Mint started supplying all the blanks for the new Canadian nickel dimes, quarters, 50-cent pieces, and dollars when Canada converted off silver to nickel. And we made first the blanks, and then we made strip, just flat rolling strip, and the Canadian Mint would actually punch them out. We also had the only atomizer circuit in Western Canada, or in Canada, period. And an atomizer, basically what that does is you take nickel coins that were struck, like fully struck, you throw them into this thing, and it atomizes it and reduces back to powder. So the Canadian Royal Canadian Mint had a number of truckfuls of brockage material. And this is stuff that is minted, like fully struck, but not released, or has some sort of a flaw. And all of this was shipped to Fort Saskatchewan and eventually melted down or atomized. Now, the one thing you'll notice, or if you follow Canadian numismatics, is that a lot of interesting Canadian varieties seem to originate in the Edmonton area. They're first discovered there. Well, what happened is the atomizer circuit, of course, the security was intense. Anytime a shipment from the Royal Canadian Mint showed up, there were armed policemen, armed guards, helicopters, the whole 9 yards, all out there, and watching every penny go into the atomizer. So every cent that fell on the floor or that fell out of a pail or whatever was accounted for. However, what they didn't know was the atomizer itself had a vacuum bag attached to it. So if something fell beside the atomizer, the vacuum bag would take it up. And after all the security left and all the mint officials and everybody was happy that it was a job well done, they'd auction the vacuum bag off to an employee. You know, the guys would just get together and auction the vacuum bag off. So all of a sudden, a few rarities started showing up in the Edmonton area. One of those was a 1969 large date dime, the 10-cent piece, which if you follow Canadian numismatics, there's only about 17 examples on record. When I was 13, I had one. I used to deliver newspapers as a kid, and I used to have a lot of dimes with me because the price was 90 cents per week. So I had lots of dimes. And as I said, I started collecting coins when I was about 12. So I was always looking at my change. And one time I had a 1969 large date dime. that was considered a rarity, but nobody knew how unique it was. I actually had two of them, spent one and kept one. Long story short, my little brother eventually ended up spending that at the local convenience store. So I lost it. And then it was only 30 years later that I realized how rare that coin actually was. But there's a very good chance that it ended up in a vacuum bag because, I mean, the thing is, the gentleman who was handling most of those 17 picked them up from the same source, who happened to be a retiree, a Sherrit retiree living in the United States. So some interesting stories on the side, some of which I can only confirm through hearsay. I can't get anybody to actually talk about on record because of the sensitivity, you know, the national sensitivity of it. So the other thing that Sherrit did was they made strip and coinage for Canada, of course, South Africa, Brazil, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Trinidad, Tobago, Philippines, Bahamas, Hungary, and Holland in the early days, and then branched off into Latin America. One of the problems, though, is coin sales is not an easy thing to do. Most countries that mint coinage prefer to keep it in-house. They wouldn't contract some small, tiny company in Western Canada to manufacture their coinage for them. They wouldn't even trust them with it. So when one of our salesmen would show up at the mint master's office, in a couple of cases, Rex Pierce and Alan Lee, who followed him, got tossed into jail in their various countries that they went to because nobody believed them. So it was very difficult to sell coins and bring samples across. The Canadian market was a little bit more forgiving, and 85% of all the Canadian municipal trade tokens were made at Sherrit starting in 1966 and ending in around 1995. So in 1971, about 70% or 70 pure nickel coins were in use throughout the world. 37 of these coins were sourced at Sherrit. Nickel bonded steel was a process that was invented around 1972-73, and what it involved was plating nickel, pure nickel, to a steel planchet and then bonding it, making it, giving it the same properties as striking nickel, but with the resilience and cheapness of steel. It took a long time to try and sell these things, but eventually a lot of markets came around, and in fact, a good portion of Latin American coinage is based on the NBS or nickel bonded steel process, and in fact, Sherrit sold a couple of plants to Latin American countries. Just which ones I don't have listed here, which is unfortunate. So the aureate bonded steel, or aureate bonded nickel, sorry, was the loonie, the Canadian dollar coin, which has a gold appearance to it. And that was also invented at Sherrit in the 1970s. And so what we ended up doing was building a plating plant here in Fort Saskatchewan to make the blanks for that. And then in 1986, Sherrit got awarded the contract to replace the dollar bill, the Canadian dollar bill, with a aureate bonded nickel coin. And there's a couple of stories involved in that are actually quite interesting. I'm involved in one of them, but it all has to do with why the loon was selected as opposed to the Voyageur obverse, which was on previous incarnations of the Canadian dollar coin. So the Sherrit Mint closed down officially in 1995 as the rolling mill was spun off to the West End Corporation. The Sherrit Gordon, the company, broke up into a number of pieces. And eventually the Royal Canadian Mint put the Sherrit Mint out of business and closed it down for good. So that is an example of a Sherrit Mint coin, a token. Our salespeople would take examples of these, which depicts and shows the kind of quality of our die our die makers, and our minting quality. It's got frosted surfaces. We could do that. We could do proofs. We could do just about anything that anybody ever asked for. Coins were made in nickel, silver, or even gold, and we did make some platinum ones. Normally through the course of this presentation, I would be passing around some sample books because I do have one set of salesman samples of the coinage that the Sherrit Mint made. So the next portion of this is just a quick evolution of the loonie to show you the process of how a loonie coin was made, and it takes it from the nickel briquette depicted on the left to the aureate bonded steel, aureate bonded nickel coin on the right. First, it starts with nickel powder, pure 100% nickel powder. Then it's put through a compact mill, which compacts the powder, rolls it into a strip, and then it's put through a sintering furnace. This is a furnace that operates at a very, very high temperature to melt the nickel and fuse the nickel together. And then it's rolled into a flat strip of the desired thickness, and then goes to slitting where the rough edges are then slit off of it. So the left is a picture of the sintering furnaces. They're still in existence. We actually use them for making cobalt briquettes nowadays. And the cold rolling mill, and the big wheel there that is depicted shows a roll of strip, and that is how it would be sold to customers in rolls of that size. From the cold rolling mill, it goes to a flap wheel where it's polished, and then into a punch press. And the punch press punches out a planchet that is depicted here on the left. This is a pure nickel planchet. It hasn't been treated in any fashion yet. It then goes through a deburring process where any rough edges are taken off of it, and then the coin is edged. So they put the round edge around it. So the punch press, that is a punch press around 1962, punching out blanks. And then the compactor, or the compact strip, here again, shown in the early days. There aren't too many later photographs of the rolling mill in existence. Eventually, it became impossible to take photographs there. The company didn't permit it. So after it's gone through the mechanical process, it then gets sent to the plating process. Unfortunately, I don't have any photographs of the plating process. It was actually a very interesting process whereby you use, it was anodes and cathodes. It's submerged in a, I believe it was a nickel sulfate bath, or yeah, that was to plate nickel on NBS. But I mean, the aureate was obviously a brass bath. And it's plated, then it goes for burnishing and finishing. And then it goes into the auto sorter where the coins that have blemishes are sorted out, and then into a mechanical sorter, and then a visual sorter. This chroming furnace, it's still in existence. It's hasn't been used in 40 or 50 years. It doesn't look like this anymore. I was just walked past it last week. It's actually pretty ugly, but it was a neat picture, so I thought I'd show it. And then the coinage press, we had 6 coinage presses. They're German made, and our millwrights were able to crank these things up to running about 140% of what the Germans thought they could do. It was so impressive, actually, that the company that made these things came back to us and actually asked us how we did it. All 6 coinage presses were eventually sold in 2000 to a firm in Ontario, and they're still in existence today. So as far as quality control goes, they look for visual inspection for plating imperfections, burning, blistering, and then they measure it for thickness, and then coins are picked at random and thrown into sample buckets and then sent off to the customer. They were usually packed in 45-gallon drums or in wooden boxes for shipping. This is a picture of the sorting process, and there's me circa 1982. It's one of the first jobs I had at Sherrit. And I'm sitting there sorting out loonie blanks, not loonie blanks. This was nickel bonded steel. Here again, talking about the NBS plant, there's some personalities here that need to be identified at any rate. Alan Lee is on the left. He was a main driver into the rolling mill. He was its biggest champion. And he took over from Rex Pierce, who's in the back row towards the right. The two gentlemen right in the front holding the shovel, they're very important. Vladimir Mascu, who is basically the inventor of our hydromet nickel process. He perfected it. He took the chemistry from theory into practice. And the gentleman to his left would be Dave Thomas, who was the president of the company at the time, who replaced Eldon Brown. And that's the groundbreaking ceremony in 1980. The rolling mill used to do open houses. We used to run the public through, show them all the machines in action, bang off a lot of coins. At that particular time, the Klondike dollar was one that we made. In the Edmonton area, there are still millions of these things around. Very easy to find one. So that's why the girls there were in a sort of a 1890s costume to commemorate that. And then, yes, at the time, my father used to also work in the rolling mill as a production superintendent in the late 70s and the early 80s. So I'm second generation Sherrit. So that's an open house. As I said, tours were given every summer. And I participated in a couple of those tours and was fascinated by all the machines making a lot of racket in there, and kind of led me into where I am today. So currently, the rolling mill plant is still in existence. The building is still owned by Sherrit International. And we use it to make cobalt, or to finish cobalt briquettes, and use it as storage. Two other companies share the building as well, since Sherrit Gordon broke up, Oerlikon out of Switzerland, and Umicore, also out of Switzerland. Both of these companies are involved in producing the elusive nickel blends for jet engines. Due to Helms-Burton legislation in the United States, Sherrit International cannot do business in the United States. And that seems to be a workaround around that. So just to encapsulate, basically Sherrit Mint made a blank strip for the RCM for 1961 to 2001. That's when we made the last run of numismatic grade loonies. Trade dollars, we made most of them, 85% of them, between 1966 and 1995. And then after West Aim closed up in the early 2000s, I went on a hunt for some samples. Some of the employees there told me, oh yeah, we know where there's some samples, come with me, we'll find them. They were all gone. I did manage to save about 11 boxes out of the rolling mill, which is currently in the possession of the Edmonton Numismatic Society. The last contract that we had was for the euro coinage for Spain and Portugal. We made the 1 cent and the 2 cent pieces for them. And they, of course, stamped them in Portugal and in Spain. And of course, a tenuous relationship did exist between Sherrit, or West Aim, and the Royal Canadian Mint, to the point where the Royal Canadian Mint eventually essentially put the Sherrit Mint out of business. One of the processes we had, of course, was the nickel bonded steel coin. The Royal Canadian Mint adopted it. However, their chemist and our chemist went to the same university together and didn't really like each other. So in order to get around the patent, their chemist added a layer of copper into the plating process. And that is currently the way the Royal Canadian Mint plates its coinage nowadays. So they didn't pay royalties to us for basically using our process. We sold plants to the Chinese, the South Africans, and there's I believe a coinage plant in Brazil that is based on our nickel bonded steel process. Sherrit sold the entire plant and the rights to them. I think we made coinage for both Colombia and Venezuela as well. So I have to give my thanks to Dan Gosling for providing the package of material. And some of this, part of this research was also based on Rex Pierce's articles in the CCN, the World Coin News. He published quite a few articles related to Sherrit. And then, of course, some Sherrit related material and some people who used to work at the rolling mill or still work at Sherrit. And that is about it. So I'll leave the floor open for any questions.
Okay, Mark, thank you so much. It's a very interesting topic that honestly I didn't know about the Sherrit Mint, and now we know a few things about it. It's very interesting. So thank you so much, and thank you also for the Edmund Numismatic Society. So I will ask our friends if anyone has a question. Please open the microphone and let us know.
Hi, Mark. This is Sogi. How are you?
Good, thank
First,
you.
congratulations for your talk. It was very, very interesting.
Thank you.
And then I would like to know, you said you were able to keep some of the material that the Mint had, and it was donated to the Canadian Numismatic Society. Do you have any idea what happened with the dies and the rest of the tools? Sherrit still has those, or they were destroyed, or what happened with that?
Generally, what would happen is the dies were sent back to the customers, and they would decide their ultimate fate. Sherrit held on, didn't hold on to too many dies. I do have a few, or we do have a few in our possession, and they're mostly of Governor General medals that were minted by the Sherrit Mint. And I believe there is a set of Commonwealth Games medals that Sherrit owned. The rest of it were sent back to the original client and then probably destroyed.
Thank you very much. By the way, do you have a collection of your own with numismatic material from the Mint, or just coins?
I have coins from the Sherrit Mint, and currently that 11 boxes of rolling mill material is sitting in my basement. Yes.
Wow.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Well, does anyone else have a question?
Maybe for you, Andres, do you have an idea? He mentioned that they sold some of the nickel to make coins in Colombia. Do you?
I didn't know about that. So it's first time I heard about it. I didn't even know about the Sherrit Mint. So it's been so interesting to know that it exists. Honestly, I didn't know they made planks for Colombia.
Mark, Mark, can you find which year those blanks were sold to Colombia, or approximate?
Yeah, I'll take a look and I'll see what I can find. As I said, I'm not entirely sure. It would have been in the 70s.
Okay.
And I know Venezuela was one of the client countries that we did have. Colombia, I thought it was, but I'll have to check.
Because that would be a great finding, Andres.
Yes, we can make an article out of it if we find that we use the Sherrit Mint material to produce coins. Yes, we're open to do that at Numis Call. So yeah, we can cooperate for a further research about that. Thank you so much.
Okay.
So Mark, what is happening with the company now?
The company still exists. We still make nickel, except that it's called Sherrit International.
Okay.
It's We still make nickel primarily for stainless steel use and also for batteries.
But not blanks anymore, no, right?
No, no,
Okay.
no. The mint was closed down in 2000, and all that machinery was sold.
Okay. Here we have in our chat, Alan Infantis telling us that in the 70s in Colombia, most of the blankets were made in nickel coated steel.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So if it was nickel bonded steel or nickel covered steel, then that's our process.
Okay. Okay. Wow. Well, Marc, once again, thank you so much for being here. I think we don't have any more questions, so we're good to finish. Thank you so much for a very interesting topic about Sherrit Mint, and thank you for your support with our Congress.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Okay, I also want to thank Álvaro Rodríguez for everything we did to make this happen, and to thank all of you for being here with us. In case that you guys or anyone missed the presentation today, we're gonna have it on our YouTube channel. So in case, Marc, you want to share your presentation, you're gonna be able to see it in our YouTube channel. Thank you all for being here. We're approaching to the event in Cartagena. I really hope, Marc, that you can change your mind and be with us in Cartagena. We can host you here, and we will be very happy to have you in our event.
I'd like to try and make it there. I will give it a try. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Marc. That was a great.
Thank you. Gracias a todos por acompañarnos hoy en una jornada más de las conferencias previas a Cartagena 2021. Se acerca la fecha para saludarnos, para abrazar nuevamente esta familia numismática. Gracias a todos por su compromiso, por estar aquí con nosotros. Álvaro, muchas gracias a ti por organizar el evento hoy, y de nuestra parte a la Sociedad Numismática de Edmond, pues un agradecimiento por ser una entidad adherente, por acompañarnos, por apoyarnos en el evento de Cartagena, y para que por favor les pedimos a todos que serán más que bienvenidos en nuestro evento y esperamos verlos aquí.